Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Wolf, and it's good to be helping. Last time, I talked about 10% of what you earn is yours to keep. And this week, I wanted to discuss something that, well, this is what really drives me to be so very adamant about staying away from debt, about keeping yourself from being in debt to begin with. Another simple phrase that may seem harsh at first, but something that I've held very true for many years. I've been taught from a very young age that one should avoid debt as one would avoid the plague. Like I said, pretty harsh. But it does make a little more sense the more you think about it. Honestly, much like with any kind of disease, when it comes to debt, it is far, far easier to prevent rather than to cure. When you are taking steps to keep yourself from getting into debt, it is far easier to maintain that kind of habit rather than taking steps to get yourself out of debt once you are mired within it. Much like any kind of illness. We think about getting vaccinations against disease, something that we won't have to ever think about for the rest of our lives, just a couple little steps very early on in life that we save ourselves from all that suffering. And debt can very much be the same way. That if you take certain steps, especially early on in life, because the sooner, the so much better, that if you can avoid getting yourself into debt by taking those certain few steps and be dedicated to those few steps, that you can save yourself from even years or even decades of so much stress and headache and worry of being constantly mired in debt later in life. And one of the biggest problems with debt that I see today is the ease of use surrounding credit cards. And what makes that so prevalent today is the fact that creditors make it so very easy and so very widespread. They want as many people, even younger and younger, to have access to credit cards and make it seem like it's something that it's no big deal, that you gain access to something that everyone else has and that everyone else uses and that allows you to get whatever it is you need or whatever it is you want when you want it. And you don't have to worry about paying for things that you want right now because it's not something you have to think about right now. They don't want you to think about the consequences right now. And oh my goodness, how dangerous that mindset can be, especially the younger you are. Even in college campuses these days, you'll see little tables set up, especially for freshman students who are touring the campuses. People who have been sent there to sign them up for their very first credit card because they make them think like, hey, this is part of being an adult. Everybody has these things. This is kind of essential. Everybody needs to have their credit score, start building that up early in life. You need to start being an adult. You need to start using a credit card to learn about responsibility. This is absolutely necessary. It's something that you need to be absolutely careful about. And like I've said before, you need to learn to avoid debt as you would avoid the plague, because it can lead to years of suffering later in life. We hear stories and we try to tell ourselves that, oh, we know about all these other people who have been living for so long, worrying about constantly living paycheck to paycheck and never thinking that they're ever going to get themselves out of their circumstances. But that'll never be me because, hey, I'll prepare now. I'll never have to think about that. I'll be smarter than that. I'll get a good paying job, better than they had, and I'll be wiser in how I'm going to spend my money. What kind of habits are you building in order to support what you're saying, though? How are you really going to avoid those same pitfalls that everyone else seems to have fallen into? How are you going to obtain that discipline unless you start taking those steps now? Unless you start training yourself now? Unless you decide, this is important. I'm going to protect myself against this terrible plague that has gripped so many people around the world and has caused so much stress and heartache and worry. Because once you fall into that trap, it's so very difficult to get yourself out. Creditors make it so easy to fall into that. They want it to be so easy. They encourage it in every way they can. They make it seem like this is part of being an adult. You want to build your credit score. You want to be a part of the in crowd and have all the finest things that everyone else has. Keep up with the Joneses. I know I mentioned that in an earlier video, but I feel like I need to repeat myself because this is the kind of mindset that is so prevalent and the reason for so much debt within the world today. People don't want to think about what the consequences are going to be for the debts they incur. They don't want to take those steps now to learn that discipline, to keep themselves from getting into debt. If you have a mindset to fear going into debt, to say to yourself, do I really need what I think I want to buy with this credit card? Is it really worth that kind of heartache that I'm going to put myself through later? Because it always seems like such a little thing whenever you make that little purchase now. In many cases, it's many, many little things that just add up into a big thing. In essence, it's building a habit. It's building a habit that you have less and less control over the more you give in. The less you think about it, the less afraid you are of it. The more that it's going to control you, and the more that you're going to have to fight it later in life in order to climb yourself back out of that pitfall. Unless you decide early in life, unless you decide now, this is important to me. I want to have the kind of life that gives me freedom from debt, where I decide what I'm going to do with what I have, where no one else has that kind of hold over me. My lady and I were able to reach that goal. I made that decision many years ago that I was going to avoid any kind of debt outside of my education and our home. Those two things. I will go into the reasons why those two things I believe are worthwhile going into debt over. But wherever and whenever possible, avoid any other kind of debt you can. Look at it the way you would think of a disease. Something that grabs hold of you and causes such pain and heartache, worry and stress. And imagine that by taking measures now, you can prevent that from ever happening to you. Imagine never having to go through that. Because I'm sure all of us have heard stories or seen family members or friends, seen firsthand what it has done to them. You may think yourself that you are immune to such things, that you are wiser, that you will plan better, that you will not fall into those same traps. Not without discipline. Not unless you decide this is important. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start now. I'm going to make this change, and I'm going to stick with this change for however long it takes. Because I want that freedom. Think about that. I have believed in this. I have trusted in this. And it has worked for me and for my lady. I believe it can work for you too. And I would like to hear other stories of whether you have heard from those who can or who have climbed out of those pitfalls in their own lives. Because it is not impossible. It is never impossible. Let me know. Because as always, I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.